After talking to a stationary camera alone in the dark for about maybe 30 minutes, I realized I hadn't plugged in my microphone. Whoops. So, this video was prompted by a post I made on Amiibo. If I could talk, that would be wonderful. The question was, would it be more entertaining to hear a story about my first time as a player character or as my first time as a dungeon master? I got a reply, and dungeon master it was. So, here it is. I decided that I'm not terribly experienced enough to quickly run down a whole bunch of stuff that would happen through the campaign itself and the characters and the players that I have come to. Well, I've come to play with a lot of them and a bunch of them differently at different times throughout almost a year now. But I decided what I can do is, because this is technically my very first campaign, I don't count like just giving a bunch of friends like make-believe situations as like a full-on campaign. So this is my very first actual dungeon master experience, that I could just make a video about a bunch of things that I should have learned in hindsight. In hindsight, these things should have been very, very clear to me. And I narrowed it down to five things that I definitely should have known more about. So here we go. Number one was too many players and players that I don't personally know. Little bit of a backstory is that I was playing a Star Wars RPG with a group of maybe 5 or 6 people, right? I was just a player, and the reason why I dropped out of that is because I had some, I wasn't really getting along with one of the players to the point of, just wasn't. The amount of fun I could have while playing the game didn't outweigh the friction. Looking back, it was petty, and I could have just stomached through it. But long story short, I stopped playing Star Wars RPG, and there was this day of the week that I just wasn't doing anything. So I decided to invite a couple of the coworkers to play some Dungeons and Dragons, and that's how it was. That's how it was born. So what ends up happening is I invite about 5 players, maybe only 4, but I end up getting 7 players. 7 players to participate in Dungeons and Dragons, and 4 of them I know for sure had never played the game before, and this was totally new territory for them. So, at least we'd all be on the same page, or at least most of us would be on the same page. But the reason why 7 players was too much for me to handle then, and in some respects it'd be too much for me to handle right now, is that I just didn't have enough experience. I just didn't have the. It'd be like going into the heavyweight championship if you've got like maybe 3 matches under your belt. You're not ready. Like if you're good enough, you might be able to last a few rounds, but. And I'm sure that there are going to be a couple of examples that people can point out to me. It's like, oh, this person managed to make it to the finals, And, he was only, he was a rookie. Anyway. But with 7 players, and each one of them having a unique race, backstory, and goals, it was just a bit too much for me to juggle all at once. And this became even more complicated when, because we had 7 people, I didn't want to continue the full-on story, the storyline in the campaign, with only 4 of them out of the 7, or worse, 3 of them out of the 7. So it was all too common at the time that the first 3 sessions went out without a hitch, but work, school, other stuff, players just weren't able to make it. So bit too naive, a bit too young, and just wasn't good. Nowadays, I think if I look around, if I look around hard enough, I might be able to get 7 players. But I'm good with the number I have now. But the player that I didn't know personally, I invited one of my coworkers, and I was asked, "Hey, do you mind if I bring my roommate along?" And I was like, I should have said no. I should have said no for a couple of reasons, or a few reasons. The first reason is that I am very new to this. And if you're new to this, you want to have as few unknown elements as possible. Right? Because you don't know who this person is. You don't know if it's going to be a good meld for the group. You don't know if there's going to be conflicts of a deeper interest. But I should have said no on the principle of that, and I also should have said no in just the sheer reason that, hey, I invited you. If I meet this person, and I like him, sure, go ahead, bring her along. But that's not what ended up happening. Anyway, that player didn't really last long. I think it was 3 sessions. The first one was just building a character, and then the second 2 was, went out without a hitch, and then school and work. Number 2 was not enough content in the starting village, and my over-eagerness to begin the sandbox style. Ooh, this was a doozy, and I only came to realize this moderately recently. I think within the past 2 months, I came to this conclusion, because I built this world from scratch. I built the world from scratch because I wanted to pay homage to a live-action role-playing game that I took part in the Louisiana Renaissance Festival. It was called Heroes on a Quest, and it was very heavily inspired by D&D. You had classes inspired by them, quests inspired by them, items inspired by them, and it was run by some of the biggest nerds you are ever going to meet. Each one of them has their own spin on things, and each one of them has their own histories and experiences with playing role-playing games. So all of them just loved the game and loved the ability to bring that to the Renaissance Festival. Actually might be a cool idea for a video in the future. Just talk about the shit that happened there. So I drew out a map, full-on sketched out a map. Give me a second. I've drawn out a few maps since then. But I was very proud of this world map. Next page. I was very proud of this world map, and I wanted my players to have this sense of scale, and I wanted my players to, legitimately choose choose where they go. I'm not sure how well you can see that. But, yeah. I had recently come off of watching another video as well on YouTube where the guy was comparing the railroad type of campaign to the sandbox style of campaign and the effects that can have on players and dungeon masters. And the take I got out of it was sandboxes are just better. So I made the mistake of just setting the players up with a very, very basic, very, looking back, easy first dungeon, and then just open up the world to them. Like, go out, be free. You have no idea what you're doing, but go wild. But I realized a couple months ago that aside from basically just telling them how noble the people are over there, I really didn't give them a chance, an honest chance to bond with the people of Albright, the starting village. I didn't give them a chance to actually get to know the world or its history. And I definitely could have done that. I should have done that because the opening setting of Albright is it's very heavily influenced by the game in Louisiana. The Louisiana Renaissance Festival is called Albright, the village of Albright, if I'm remembering correctly, which I'm pretty sure I am. So I could have done a lot more. I had the names for the tavern owners, I had the names for the blacksmith, the guild hall for just, that was a no-brainer. And I even developed this, jousters. Jousters would live there, and there were whole families off on the other side that would, have a whole slew of quests for the characters. There was even a family tomb in the center of a cemetery that could have very easily been a huge source for deeper themes or planting for eventual payoffs, foreshadowing, stuff like that. And I didn't have enough starting content for it, so that was a big mistake of mine. Nowadays, they probably have a bigger connection to the city they're in now, which is almost a complete antithesis of what Albright is. Albright is it's a place for heroic characters, for heroics, just heroes. It's basically an order of heroes, and it's pretty much everyone there is on the good alignment, and they fight evil. So, if an evil is to arise, Albright's going to be a very heavy target. So one of the things that's a direct result of that is the use of magic when it is not needed is frowned upon. Because aside from cantrips, of course, because you can use cantrip all the fucking day. But, magic is a precious resource. So if you're casting spells that, drains a spell slot and something attacks you or attacks the village, it's I guess it would be like using practicing with sniper rifle rounds, but you're in a military zone. There's training and there's practicing, and then there's waste. Even though you get it back the next day, that's why it's not an actual law. Don't cast magic. It's just frowned upon. The city that they're in right now is nothing like that. They can brawl in the street if they want to, but it's just expected that you buy the loser a drink. Yeah, and I was too eager to begin the sandbox for, I thought it was going to be more fun, which in some ways it has been, but in other ways it's been more complicated than it has to be. And a lot of this is going to boil down to I wasn't properly prepared. I wasn't experienced enough for it. Number 3 the introduction of legendary figures was way too early. So, having the guild masters of the Silver Bear Guild, which is what I named them in the campaign, having them being all 20th level like NPCs, I consider that to be fine. Like they're veterans, they've done a whole lot of adventuring on their own, and now, like, if they wanted to, they could take care of every problem. But their time is best suited training newer recruits, right? But while they were in this abandoned keep, and this was the first dungeon that I had them scout out, they came across this banister, and the banister itself had this figure of this imposing horseman, massive blade, just tearing down pikemen and infantrymen. I had just come off of playing Darksiders 3, so I had the Horsemen of the Apocalypse fresh in my mind. So I very heavily, I took a bit too much inspiration on that. So that I took inspiration then where I probably could have made my own thing. But you know, having a banister up there is one thing. You know, having a lore behind, you know, like these legendary horsemen that would just appear and disappear, that's one thing. I can't remember when it happened, but I basically confirmed that they were real people and that they're not exactly gone. I confirmed their existence way too early. And I definitely should have held back on that and expanded more of the, you know, like non-legendary heroes lore of this world. I definitely could have and should have done something a bit, you know, more like that, having more self-contained narratives until they got to a more appropriate level, because at this point they know what's out there, but they're level 4 at this point. You know, like they're almost at level 5, like, you know, 3 of them are. So at this point, it's like, it's kind of like knowing about an endgame content or like a mid-level content, but you're like level 3, and you gotta be like level 15 to like have a chance. So that was something I could have done better. I could have like just left it at, you know, it was just a tapestry. You know, the fucker who built the damn thing could have taken artistic lineage, creative leeway, creative license. Number 4, too many homebrew or uncertain character races. This one kind of is a two-parter, with the first one being too many players and players I didn't personally know. In the sense that I don't do it anymore. And there's even this book that it claims that, you know, it's a new subclass, or at the very least it's new to us, called the Valkyrie. And the Valkyrie is a subclass for the Barbarian and the Paladin. It says here on the bottom corner that it's 5e compatible, and it's a published book. So I'm more okay with this. But when one of the starting races was a clown, where none of my players could actually pinpoint what published book it was from, probably not the best of ideas. I probably should have had the players go, look, I know that, you know, that you want to play this race. I know that you think it's really cool, but new DM here. I'm new to this. If you can find it in like a published book and like a physical copy, like if you're willing to have like a physical copy, like this is a physical published copy. You know, that's giving me a bit more leeway. But no one could tell me where this Klon race came from. Like, they could give me like a website with like the picture of the Klon and then like the racial descriptions, which, yeah, looking back, it's not terrible. I don't really think it was any more or less powerful than any other, added on races. But dangerous game, dangerous, pretty dangerous field for a new dungeon master to, shift through. That player left due to school and work, and the player that was the rooming played a tiefling sorcerer. Yeah, tiefling sorcerer. So what ended up happening was, because those two player characters, like the characters were basically joined at the hip, with one of them gone, it didn't really make sense for the tiefling to stick around when the Klon was just, literally leaving with the circus. So I agreed, like, yeah, you can make a new character. New player character. New character was a vampire bard. Not even in Volo's Guide to Monsters does it give you stats on a vampire. So we had to look through this. She contacts me one of those days and says, like, oh, yeah, I found two. I found two of them. I'm leaning more towards this one because that one seems a bit too powerful. So I look over both of them. I'm like, again, I shouldn't have done this, but I said, like, yeah, we'll do this one. We will do this one, and I'll print it off. So I printed it off, handed it off, and it was like, yeah, here you go. That's your racial sheet. And that new character, Iona, was only around for like, I honestly can't remember. Like, if she were around for a second session, I don't remember what happened. I do not remember what happened on that second session of Iona being a player character. I do not remember. So that was something. So that was number 4. Too many homebrew or uncertain character races. Side note, remind me to do a video on the Valkyrie, because, like, just skimming through it, I've got my gripes with just the book itself, but at the same time I've also got, like, some questions and excitement. And I know that's dangerous to say because one of my players has pretty much already decided that if his current character dies, or like during the next campaign, he's basically making one of these. He's just throwing caution to the wind, throwing the Valkyrie in there, and I'm like, oh fuck. Oh fuck, that's gonna be interesting. Number 5 is something I don't even need to look at the list for. Because, and when I tell you what I should have done, you are going to think me an absolute fool. Or arrogant. That's a potential. There was one basic, fundamental thing that I should have learned from the get-go. I should have done from the get-go. And looking back, it is just so... It was not good. It was not good. Something that I failed to do. I failed to do this. Was not, failing to buy a DM screen. You can play without a DM screen. It's useful, but it's not necessary. It wasn't, buying and painting miniatures. You can play without these. It wasn't you know, it wasn't buying a game mat, like a grid board. You can play without these. What I failed to do as a dungeon master I bought the books. I got the Dungeon Master Guide, I got the Player's Handbook, and I got the Monster Manual. I bought all of them. I didn't finish reading them. Yeah, so by the time when I was playing the first handful of sessions, I still hadn't finished reading the Dungeon Master's Guide. I didn't. My roommate's stealthing. Hold on. I rolled a 9. I don't see him. I failed my perception check. But, hey. So, like, the Player's Handbook, I can understand that it wasn't, entirely necessary for me to read over. Except on a couple of things. Like weapons and armors and the prices, and there were a couple of instances where players had things that they just shouldn't have. Like, one of my players no longer wanted to play a dwarf monk, and I had this rule. I went, when you reach level 3, you are stuck with that character. You are stuck with that character once you reach level 3. But until you reach level 3, I can allow one veto. You can, I'll write the character you're playing out of the narrative, and you can make a whole new one. He swapped out his character. They were close enough to level 3 that I'm pretty sure I just fucking started him at level 3. Or at the very least the same experience points as the others. And he rolled up a human cleric. Complete with shield and full plate. So, depending on who you ask, you have to buy the equipment that does not come with your race, no, not your race, your class and your background. So let's actually go back to the cleric here. That's Bard, a bit too close, a bit too far. Knowledge domain, here it is. A cleric. Equipment, you start with the following equipment in addition to the equipment granted by your background. So a mace, a warhammer, if proficient, so one or the other. Scale mail or leather armor or chainmail if proficient. So that's your starting equipment as a cleric. I allowed this guy to start with full plate, and a shield. So combine that with his domain being a Warforged cleric. This guy, from the beginning he rolled this character up, could have an armor class of 21. Like, I should have read this. Because being a Warforged cleric, yes, he has the potential to, like, forge his own armor. At this lower level, I should have said no. I should have said that could be your goal. Like, that could be a minor goal for your character to properly forge a full set of armor in the light of your god. The god of the forge. But no. Like, how many monsters in the fucking monster manual Like, just how many monsters in this book, or like Volo's Guide to Monsters, or fucking any book for that matter, without being like a deadly level threat, can even pose to effectively hit this guy? Like, not many. Like, I'm not gonna lie, like in earlier fights, after I realized how fucking high this guy's armor class was, fucking hell, like, I basically had to roll natural 20s to hit this guy. Because most of them only had like a +3 to hit. Like maybe a +5 if we're talking about like some of the nastier ones. But still, like, like, to my credit, this is not me as a skilled dungeon master. More often than not, openly rolled, when I intend to hit that guy, like, I keep on rolling natural 20s. I don't know why. Like, these dice that I've got, they're not weighted. They're completely balanced. But basically it's stuff like that where I didn't read the books thoroughly enough, and that was perhaps my biggest mistake. Biggest mistake as a beginner dungeon master. I have done what I can to correct this, and I still have trouble where I wait too long to begin reading like the monster manual and refreshing my memory on the rules of the game to, you know, like, keep it fresh in my mind for every week. But yeah. Those were my 5 mistakes. Like, the 5 mistakes that I remember and recall that in hindsight should have been fairly obvious to me. If you want more stories like this, I've got a couple of them. Shit, I got one about this campaign right now. Like, I got stories about character, like NPCs that I did not expect that the players would bond with. Or, you know, I could tell you about how I make my one-shots. Because I've had 2 of them already, and both of them seem to have gone on pretty damn well. But that's a video for another time, I guess. So, being a dungeon master, I definitely think it, with one exception, the exception being read the fucking books, I don't think I would have traded any of the other experiences for much of anything. Because, at the very least, I now know what it's like to play with 7 players. I now know what it's like to... I now know the importance of having a lot of content in a village or town for the players to explore. I now know the importance of the railroad. You know, like, because if players are left to their own devices all the time, motivation can be a problem. Or just the fact that you as the DM might have things planned for X, Y, and Z location, but the players aren't going to know that. The players are just going to want to do their own thing. And maybe they don't know what they want to do. You know, like when you get experienced players, I'm sure that they've got whole backstories mapped out and they've got their goals. But you know, playing with people I don't know, I now know the cost of that. I now know that it doesn't always work out, but it could be fun. Just know what you're getting into. I now know not to involve a homebrew, or at the very least, like, I now know the importance of looking like as far into the homebrew characters or the character races that I am not certain of. Yeah. I know them all. And I don't think I'd trade them for anything. Read the books. Fucking hell. Fun fact, and I'm not too proud of saying this. I may or may not have spent the better part of a day trying to understand the page on traps.